What's up, YouTubers? So, pellets versus slugs, slugs versus pellets. Yeah, last 5 years we've had a lot of introduction of new slugs and that, but it's not all roses and that, because there's a lot of detrimental. There's just a huge difference between shooting pellets versus shooting slugs, and there's kind of three areas. One is, the cost associated with that. There is the usability and the accuracy. Pros and cons. Let's go over this. And if you're new to slugging or new to slugs, if you're thinking about getting into it, this could help you out, because I think some people are getting into slug guns or slugs and they're not really, I guess, understanding what they're signing off on and what are some of the drawbacks, some positive things. All right, so first, this is 500 rounds. This is 500 rounds. This is a nice, pretty box. This is about 15 cents a round, and this is about 2 or 3 cents a round. So if we look at the cost, this 10 of pellets is about $16, $18, and each one of these cartons is about, I guess, $15 to $18. So you're looking at about $75 versus 20 or 15. Substantial. Yeah, about 3, 4, 5 times the cost if you look at it that way, but the costs don't end there. There's a lot of usage as far as the air that they take, because we have to shoot slugs faster, probably in the 960 to 1000 area. You're using a lot more air. So a gun like this could use, probably 200, 300, 400 shots in 22. Slugs, you might get 100 shots. So it's using 2 to 3 times the air to generate that, because you can slow down your pellets a lot less, use a lot less air, and that can be a benefit. But yeah, the expense just doesn't stop at the air usage, because you're filling up more. You have to go to the store. You have to have your compressor running. It's also the wear and tear on the gun. You're filling up the gun 2 to 5 times more each outing. And with that, so you're running your compressor more, but also you're putting more stress on your gun in itself. You're filling it up, things are heating up, and generally, because the slugs run a little bit hotter and they need more pressure, your regulation pressure or your reg pressure has to go up. But also, they're filling these guns to 300 bar, 250, 300 bar. And I think Ernest Rowe put out an article on one of his 177s. He likes to keep that under 200 bar, just for the long term, to keep the health of the gun, because when you start going over 200, 250, 300, or even more, which some of these guns, there's a lot of stress on the internals. And not only that, the stress when you're shooting, because you can shoot pellets at 15, 20 foot-pounds, but a lot of times with the slugs, you're shooting, 30, 40, 50, 60 foot-pounds. So that's wear and tear through the whole gun that you're putting in time and time out. Again, hundreds or thousands of shots that you're using, O-rings, seals, all that stuff feels that pressure when you're pushing slugs all that much with that much foot-pounds of energy. Yeah. And then there's some other compromises which we'll get into. But the accuracy, let's get into that second category. So most of the people, looking at what their use case is or what they're looking for accuracy, slugs obviously are going to be more accurate plus 100 yards because of the ballistic coefficient. So if we look at the ballistic coefficient, it's like double what pellets are. Pellets obviously, they create a lot of drag in the air, they just do that. But if you look at it this way, if you're shooting something from, say, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 yards, and there's little to no wind, then what's the difference? It's only when you start really getting out there 100 plus yards that you really start seeing the benefits of slugs and that. And you have to remember that these air guns are kind of built for pellets. They spend a lot of research and development with the barrels and everything to shoot pellets very accurately. So just the things I noticed, in a perfect situation, 25 yards, 50 yards, no wind, I would take the pellets, a finely tuned pellet, over a slug. It's probably hard to believe, because all the marketing would have you believe that the slugs are much more accurate. It's only when you start getting into the high wind, the long distance, you got that less drift, you have that less drop. That's where the slugs really start coming in. So at 25 and 50 yards, the slugs can be tuned really, really well. It's just out of the box, the pellets seem to just perform just as well in that. But just know that's the kind of situation you're doing. Retained energy obviously is going to go to the slug because the ballistic coefficient supports that. So if you're looking at hitting something hard like a bigger animal at 25 or 50 yards, you want deeper penetration, more retained energy. You have to understand that the pellet just has that skirt that just slows it down so much. So at 100 yards, that pellet's kind of really starting to drop like a rock. And the energy, it's just shedding energy very quickly, where obviously that's what the slug is built for. These are hybrids. These are 22 ounce or 22 grain, and they're they call them FX hybrids for a reason, because they're not really a true bullet per se. They're kind of in the middle ground, trying to save you more air, yet get the ballistic coefficient of a true slug out of a gun. And it does pretty well. It does pretty well, but there's just some drawbacks with that, yeah. So in addition to the accuracy, you have long distance shooting is a little bit better. Your drop, your wind drift, your retained energy, everything kind of benefits the slugs when it comes to long distance. As we mentioned, the pellets kind of do better up close under perfect conditions without wind. But let's talk usability, because a lot of people might kind of forget about this. So, what are you going to use the gun, rifle, and that bullet or the pellet for? Backyard pesting. There's collateral damage. If you're pushing a high FPE out of a slug, you have more chance for ricochets. If it's on a barn, or let's say a farm, you have barns that could put holes through the ceiling, gear, tires, windshields, all that stuff that exists on a farm. You're a little bit more probable of doing some damage versus a slug, or I should say the pellet has a tendency just to disintegrate. When it hits something, it just loses all its form, and it's pretty much game over. But the retained energy now becomes kind of a collateral damage, an issue when you're doing stuff up close, especially if you're in a neighborhood, you're trying to get rid of maybe some rabbits or something along that line. There's just no reason to be shooting a slug or anything at that with any kind of foot-pounds of energy, where maybe you can kind of sneak away with getting a pellet in here and there. Also with that, the usability of hunting, depends if you really want to do some pest control on a farm. If you happen to hit, let's say, a sparrow, a bunch of sparrows on a wire, if you hit them with 50 or 60 foot-pounds, or even 30 for that matter from a slug, it makes a very loud pop. And people, well, you hit them with a lot of energy, but you kind of over hit them. Pellets, 6 to 12 foot-pounds of energy. The gun report is much more silent. You can't hear it, and the initial impact on the animal is much quieter, so you don't scare sparrows. One thing I've noticed with 30 cals or any other guns that are high performance, they hit the bird so hard that all the other birds leave, and you're not really doing a very good pest control, because they'll just come back or they become very wary. So 6 foot-pound gun, believe it or not, or a 12 foot-pound gun is very beneficial in those kind of conditions and with the lower power. And that's just kind of goes down to the usability of that. As I mentioned, you have collateral damage, too much noise, too much firepower, retained energy. All these things in a real pest, reduction kind of situation kind of benefit the actual slugs in that. And the last part is the compromises. So if you have a slug gun, it has to kind of exist on the upper end of the foot-pounds of energy and power. And that kind of reduces your shot count. That kind of reduces a lot of different things. But these guns are, an average pellet gun is made for pellets, obviously. And so you get a lot of shots. But if you have to kind of play a no man's land of a compromise on both sides. So essentially, you got to compromise somewhere. You might have to up the power just enough to get enough for the slugs to work, but you might be overpowering your pellets. If you get that nice medium ground where you can use both and maybe tune down, so when you're shooting pellets, you can tune down the gun, and then when you're shooting slugs, you can tune up the gun. But it's probably going to be pretty rare that you can get the optimal blend for both. Meaning at some point you run the risk of tuning your gun way up or tuning it way down, that you just can't get the optimal, feet per second for each projectile. And that's the thing, you wish you could have 2 guns, one to shoot slugs and slugs only, and then a nice pellet gun that can get just tons of shots, low power in that. But if you only have one, you're probably gonna have to make that compromise somewhere in their shot count versus power and what you get out of the gun. And that's it, guys. That's kind of the take, you know. Slugs are awesome, but I don't think they're for everyone. There's a lot of drawbacks to them. They're great accuracy, long distance, retention of power, but there's a lot of other associated costs that goes with that that I struggle with myself. I struggle like just wanting to sometimes just go back to pellets alone because it's so many more shots and it's such a hassle. I hate refilling my rifle, and you just want to keep shooting, just have fun. So that's it, guys. I appreciate it. Got comments, questions, mark them down below, and hopefully I will see you next week.